I just wanted to actually pick up on Chris's points, because so many of the points that you made about sustainability and building those teams and that fluidity are insights that I think Sandbox in 2 or 3 years has acquired so rapidly that Ashoka probably has, over 20 years to 30 years, has been evolving towards and also converging on very similar principles. So absolutely endorse in those points. I guess, yes, we're probably a bit of the granddaddy in the room when it comes to the social enterprise movement. But maybe I can illustrate some of the insights that we've learned over the course of the last 3 decades and kind of the evolution of the thinking of Ashoka in terms of this whole idea of how you build a civic movement, and then that point about how collaborative teams comes into this. So when Ashoka was started 30 years back in 1981, it was a very simple idea, which was that we believed that social change was predominantly driven by individuals, entrepreneurial individuals, who came up with a brilliant idea that could tackle a social problem. And that these individuals very often are working against the system, or are ignored by the system, or are mavericks, or are outside that. And therefore, the Ashoka model was to find these individuals at an early stage in their development when they've proven the concept of the idea, but are really struggling to get going or to get recognition, and to come and support them. And so we gave them a fellowship, it's called, where we would come in and we'd provide some financial support, and we'd also connect them to networks and hopefully give them that credibility and help them to get access to corporate partners, government partners, whatever it took to scale. And that was the original model for 10 years, and still remains the core of what Ashoka does. But quite quickly, we discovered something quite surprising, which is that when we came in and found that brilliant individual, and we said we'll give you a stipend and we'll support you for a few years whilst you're building your idea, that was fantastic. But that wasn't the biggest benefit that a lot of these individuals said they found. The biggest benefit they said they found was that somebody had come along and recognized them for what they were doing and had given a label on that. And that it was that kind of aha moment. This is what I am, this is what I'm doing. I'm part of a movement. I'm not just an individual who's struggling against the system, or a crazy person, or, which was actually the real value of what Ashoka was. It was giving that credibility in that name. And so that kind of really triggered for us this kind of insight that we were doing something more than just finding individuals and just dropping some money in and helping them to get there. That there was a bigger picture that was at play here, and it was a bigger picture that was around common identity. So at that time there was really no idea about a name for this movement. There was no label on these maverick individuals for doing what they're doing. So we really had to stumble to try and find one. And the phrase social entrepreneur was the one that was kind of taken because it kind of represented entrepreneurialism, but at the same time represented entrepreneurialism for social good, which is kind of what we were trying to promote and come up with that idea. And that label really kind of caught on and really has now become mainstream. But just the power of the label, getting it right at the beginning, I think is one of the key insights about what you do when you start to build this movement. So we did that for 10 years, 10 to 15 years. The network grew from a handful in the beginning, starting in India, hence the name Ashoka, to about 1,000 around in the mid-90s or so on. And at the point that we were beginning to get some critical mass and really seeing dozens and hundreds of entrepreneurs in certain countries and regions working on particular themes, that's when Ashoka began to move into another phase of its development, which was around the idea of it's fantastic to have one individual creating an organization and tackling a social problem. But wouldn't it be amazing if we brought dozens of individuals together collaboratively to work together to solve social problems? So the next phase of Ashoka was really around this idea of collaborative entrepreneurship. What would happen if we took, 50 of the world's leading entrepreneurs working in the space of renewable energy, for example, and brought them together? What kind of ideas would fly? What kind of things would spark from that? And that really has been a common theme of a lot of the work of Ashoka around this time, is that the value that we bring is not just taking an individual project, helping it scale. It's the amazing things that happen when you bring together entrepreneurs, creative individuals of all kinds, and try and break down those silos and really sort of spark that movement. And so you mentioned at the beginning that I'm part of a program called the Globalizer, which is a horrible name, but it's a label that we use for a program where every year we collect 25 Ashoka Fellows from around the world who are at the point where they've proven success in their model in their country, and now they're looking to scale to multiple countries and get out to, to 10, 15, 20, or whatever it takes. And we've been running this now for about 6 or 7 years, and we've had some really interesting learnings from the successes and the failures of what it takes to launch these kinds of movements. And one of the things we've learned is that originally we thought, let's bring 15 healthcare entrepreneurs together and see what happens, or let's bring 15 people working with young people, or 15 people working in energy. And the really extraordinary breakthroughs were actually when we brought together a lot of very disparate disciplines and really mixed it up. And so in more recent years, we've now, we're still focusing on a particular theme, but now really spreading out and seeing what else we can bring into the mix. So to give you one example of that, one project that I'm working on is a project called Solar for All, which is a project around bringing renewable energy, but in particular solar energy, to off-grid villages. There's about 1.8 billion people on the planet who have no access to energy, no access to a power grid, and never will in the next few decades. It simply isn't going to happen in the rural parts of the world where they live. But there are a number of breakthrough technologies that can make a radical difference in those areas. And one of them is solar power, for a number of reasons. But one of them is because the price of solar has fallen so dramatically in the last few years. Also because it's quite small. You can start very small scale with just a small charger, which costs about $12, and get them into households quickly. And it's affordable even for people who are working, who are earning $2 a day or less. So our original idea at Solar for All was fantastic. Let's take these technologies, let's put these solar panels together, let's get them on the roofs of these villages. Suddenly, when we started doing this and looking into this, we discovered there were all kinds of problems that were taking place. People would steal these panels, for example. There was a problem, the fact that they still cost about $100. That's too expensive for many parts of the world where this is taking place. So you have to find a payment system, find a way to give them loans so they can do this. If you're in rural Africa, no chance of getting that loan. The nearest loan officer is hundreds of miles away. So again, what kind of solutions, can you come across? But then technologies started coming together, and we started to see revolutions coming from, for example, mobile phone technology, and all kinds of entrepreneurs coming forward and saying, you know what, there are 600 million mobile phones in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So what about a pay-as-you-go system where we can take this, integrate it into your solar panels? And suddenly that started to solve that problem. There were other people coming forward and saying, you know what, we can take a little microchip and embed it in the panel. And if you do that and someone steals it, it turns off, to solve that problem. And at the same time, that can also integrate with your pay-as-you-go. But suddenly these ideas from mobile world integrating sort of, started to become relevant in the solar space and, and ways that we didn't expect. And we saw that the ideas weren't just in technology, they were also in business models as well. Again, our original idea was a panel on a rural roof of a rural household. But if that's not affordable, or in certain villages doesn't work, you have to turn that model on its head. And so we found entrepreneurs who were running little shops and kiosks, and they said, you know what, we can do this. We can be an energy entrepreneur. We can have a panel on our roof, and we'll rent out this energy and charge mobile phones. And that suddenly became a model that became really interesting, turning it on its head. So it was that confluence of technological innovation, business model innovation, really mixing it up, that proved a really potent sort of mix in terms of these kinds of models. And then about 6 or 7 years back, we had another kind of big aha movement. At that point, we had reached 2,500 fellows in the Ashoka network, and we had entered into our 70th country. And we were really struggling with this idea of scale. Because again, it's this problem that comes back again and again. People keep looking and saying, where are the examples of really successfully scaled projects? And again, the entrepreneurs we work with are saying, how can we get bigger? What is the secret of success and scale? Is it franchising? Is it partnership? Is it, what model basically works? And this is a real problem for us in the programs that we were working with. So we sat down with a lot of our Ashoka fellows and began to think about this. And the insight that really struck us was that for all the Ashoka fellows that we were working with, we realized that we had defined the problem insufficiently, in that we were thinking scale means getting bigger, it means growing your organization, or it might even mean partnering with others and building a network. But if we looked at all of the different entrepreneurs we're working with, the common thing they had together was actually that they were really about system change. They were looking at a broken system, and they were asking the question, how can you change that? And so when we began to reframe the problem from not what is the NGO that can solve this problem, or what is the business model that can solve this problem, but what is the problem with the system, and how is it broken, and how can we fix that? Then we began to get some really interesting insights about civic movement building and how this would work. And we realized that if you looked at the story of Ashoka over the last 30 years, it actually chimed in really well with what Ashoka herself had been doing, because in a way we had been building, or trying to build a civic movement as well, which was the movement for social entrepreneurship, and how that had gone. And when we went back and looked at our experience, there were a number of different elements of that really leapt out and became apparent. And I'll just draw attention to just 5 points, just very quickly, and we can talk about those perhaps later. The first one is it's really important to define the movement at the beginning, and to make that label right. So social entrepreneurship at the beginning gave this label to a group of people who were very disparate in what they were doing. But we could find common solidarity around that idea. So the naming is really, really important. Secondly, it's really important to have some incredible flagship examples of what you're doing. So for us, it was the Ashoka Fellow was the kind of the brilliant example of the innovating entrepreneur. So you can point to the Muhammad Yunuses of this world and many others who really, would be brilliant examples that people would just get what it is you're about. But that wasn't enough. It's not enough just to have one or two or a few or even many people or projects or showcases that you can point to. That alone will not do it. In order to turn it into a broad movement, you have to bring in, the kind of what we call the mavens, right? Sort of people who can take those ideas and turn it into the mainstream. They can broadcast it to the wider world, and they can shout about it to the rooftops. So these are the journalists. These are the major leaders, thought leaders, and ideas people. And Ashoka was very lucky to have a number of them. People like journalist David Bornstein from the New York Times in the early days, who could really take that and build that idea and help bring it into the mainstream. And then we learned two things about structure from doing this as well. And the first is this, and I think this point has been made many times, not just in this panel, but also in previous ones as well. The top-down structure doesn't work to drive this kind of movement. It's not a small bunch of people dictating or barking orders to a group to lead this movement. If you do that, what you might end up with, at best, is a large organization, but it won't grow beyond that. If it's going to go and become a movement, you have to empower people all the way down the chain and give them autonomy and let them run. And so it's a very different kind of organization. What it requires is basically people who have those skills. So people who really see themselves as change agents, not as people who are waiting to be told what to do or waiting for orders, but who have the autonomy, the independence, the creativity, and that kind of leadership to step forward, at whatever point they are in the system or in the cycle, and to do that. And then the final point is it requires a very different sense of organization. It requires actually a breaking down of the silos. And we were only kind of stumbling on this, back in the 1980s with the idea of social entrepreneurship. That was really an attempt to break down the silo between the government sector, the charitable sector, and the corporate sector, and to say that there's actually a new kind of entity, the social enterprise, that can do this. And now I think we're at the point where we're saying even that's not enough. That it's not just social enterprise is too small a term now to really talk about the kind of the new kind of change actors, if you like, or what we call change makers, who are now stepping onto the stage and really tearing down the walls completely between these different areas. So we speak about intrapreneur, we speak about entrepreneur, people who are working in these different organizations. In many different ways, these walls have become so fluid now. And you see this with individual people who might wear many different hats. I'm the head of Ashoka here in the UK, and so I'm running an NGO. But at the same time, I'm also a social investor, and I'm also working in a private equity firm that invests in social enterprises. And all those different networks, come together in what I do to help social entrepreneurs raise finance and scale. And so although it's part of that, there's not one single label, and that's true for many people in this room. Christian heads up the Sandbox Network, but is also an academic with the LSE. And again, I think there's an enormous synergy perhaps between those different things, and I'm sure every one of the people in this room probably has a similar story to tell. So those walls are coming down, and that's really a wonderful thing about this new movement. And I'll pause there and look forward to continuing that later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.